much, everyone. I'm very sure some people will remember this popular saying that Africa's story has been written by others. We need to own our problems and solutions and write our story. But one of our own, a former deputy governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria, Professor Kingsley Moghalu, has been appointed the inaugural president of the newly established African School of Governance, which will set aside to transform the continent's leadership landscape by meeting the diverse needs of leaders across Africa. The African School of Governance Foundation announced the establishment of the ASG Graduate Institution with headquarters in Kigali, the Rwandan capital. The institution is purposely designed to offer world-class public policy, education, research, and engagement programs. And according to a statement released by Mr. John Paul, this initiative was unveiled in Kigali just about 2 days ago at an event that brought together prominent African leaders. And that school is aimed to address the continent's pressing governance challenges by equipping emerging leaders with the mindset, skills, and knowledge required for effective leadership in Africa's future. Well, when you talk about the African continent, Nigeria stands tall, not only in terms of population, but in terms of the potentials and also the leadership that individuals play, such as Professor Kingsley Moghalu, who is live for us, the inaugural president of the Africa School of Governance. It's a pleasure having you on the program tonight. Thank you so much, and congratulations on your appointment.
Thank you. Thank you, Cheryl. Nice to be with you again.
Thank you so much indeed. We've heard about Harvard School of Governance. We've heard about different schools of governance across Europe. But this one specifically targeted to improve governance and leadership in Africa. The likes of the president of Rwanda, Paul Kagame, Ethiopia's former prime minister, Mariam Desalegn, those who came together in the formation or putting together this school. But before we get into it, do you agree with those who say leadership deficit or bad leadership has been the problem of Nigeria or some African nation?
Thank you. I think it's not just a matter of agreement. It is a fact that there is a strong leadership deficit in the African continent. And going beyond that, in fact, the major problem African countries have and why they are lagging behind the rest of the world is not that they don't have enough money. It's not about debt relief. It's not about borrowing. The reason all these other problems exist, including insecurity, is because there is a deficit of leadership and governance. And so leadership and the governance that flows from it is the foundation for Africa's renaissance and for its future possibilities. And that is where we need to begin to look to. And that is why this initiative of the African School of Governance, which is a world-class university of public policy and governance at the graduate level, has been established. And I'm very honored to have been chosen as the inaugural president of the ASG.
For those who have traveled around the African continent, indeed will agree that Africa is rising. Visit some new cities in Africa, and you might be proud. You will almost mistake some cities in Africa with cities like D.C., Washington, D.C., or mistake with Paris and stuff. I mean, Johannesburg, for example. Go to Kigali, and you will almost mistake them, some part of those cities, with some of the very developed cities in the world. And those who believe that, yes, there is a huge corruption in leadership of those who govern Africa. Sits tight concept of governance in Africa. But it looks like things are changing. What do you think prompted this thinking to put together Africa School of Governance, which in any case is a graduate institution?
Well, the thinking behind the African School of Governance, the ASG, is that it's not, some countries in Africa are doing relatively well, but there are still too many countries on the continent where there is still too much poverty among their citizens. And that's the ultimate measure. It's about the welfare of the citizens, And when you look at that, then you look at the productivity of Africa's economies in various countries, you find that it's still very weak. Many of the African countries are still very natural resource dependent, and this creates a lot of economic problems for them. And many African countries have very weak public administration systems, and so they're not able to administer taxation very effectively. They're not able to render social services very effectively. They're not always able to secure their borders. And these are the real indices of development. And even though several countries have made progress, there are still too many who are far behind. And that's what led these leaders, President Kagame of Rwanda and Haile Mariam Desalegn, former Prime Minister of Ethiopia, to come together and in collaboration with a number of other African leaders, philanthropists, and academics, they felt that there needed to be a dedicated university that will train a new generation of African leaders with the mindsets, I want to emphasize mindsets, with the skills, and with the knowledge to be able to tackle Africa's problems in the 21st century. So, that's what's behind the ASG. There are a number of other schools of public policy in the continent, but what sets the ASG apart is our focus on mindset. Because as a man or a woman thinketh, so is he or she. There are many people in Africa who are very well educated. There are many people who have skills, but there is a certain cultural problem in the political and leadership and governance firmament of the continent that is preventing a real transformation. So when you say Africa is rising, it's actually a debatable statement. Africa is emerging, but a rise, in my own estimation, is what we have seen in Asia, what has happened in Malaysia, what is happening in Vietnam, what has happened in China, what happened in South Korea. So we should not suffer, from the affliction of the worship of the God of small things, where if you put a borehole, people will say, oh, this is great progress. A government is supposed to provide potable running water to all its citizens. So, I will accept that we're emerging, but to say that Africa is rising, you have to look at other parts of the world and compare whether we are truly rising in terms of economic strength, in terms of, bringing down poverty and wealth creation on the continent. So these are the issues that the African School of Governance, the ASG, is going to address. The mindset is important, and that's what's missing mainly because, values are what define every society. If a society creates a situation where its culture is the worship of material things or wealth, regardless of how it was acquired, you're going to see corruption at the top of that society rather than at the periphery. There's corruption everywhere, but in some countries, culture eats strategy for breakfast because the cultural sense, the cultural dynamics, the value systems are broken. This is very important because we want ASG to bring up, purpose-driven leaders who have a passion that service is much more about than beyond themselves as individuals. Why do people want to get into government? What happens when people get into government? I saw your previous discussion, and you were talking a lot about the waste in government and things like that. So these cultures need to be tackled before we can actually begin to make progress. And then we need to be able to understand what are the core problems we have. You can do anything in the economy, but if you don't have electricity, it's going to be very difficult for you to achieve an economic rise through productivity. So being able to identify the real problems and to prioritize them, because you can't solve every problem within a 4-year term. You must take one or two that are really, really critical and deliver the results, and somebody else will come and deliver other results. So that's what we're trying to do in ASG. We want to bring up a new generation of Africa's leaders who are different from what we see now, or an improvement, I would say, on what we see now.
I know that you sort of temporarily retire from commenting or speaking about Nigeria issues. You've tried your best. A lot of people will say, Professor Kingsley Moghalu, but I do like to remind you that you are our pride from the Nigerian, from Nigeria to the rest of Africa, and we donate you cheerfully to the rest of Africa to live in that sense. And congratulations once again. But don't turn your back on us, because people like you, your knowledge is required for our nation to move forward. But I'd like to drive down on a particular point which might need your intervention in terms of your knowledge base, whether working in Nigeria in the central bank or working outside of Nigeria in some other institution. And this has to do with the BRICS nations and the what we see as the alignment of listing of Nigeria into that bloc. And that those who will be asking, for example, the philosophy of the ASG, is it going to be asking the Africans to have a mentality to stand on their own, or what exactly, or to align with the West, or align with the East, or what exactly is the philosophy that you think, in line with what we're seeing with BRICS, the planned summit in Russia, and some of the conversation going on globally on the global economy?
That's a very good question, Sharon, because as I was saying, this is what sets ASG apart, the question of the mindsets. So ASG is going to provide world-class education in public policy and governance that is context-specific. We're going to be looking at the realities of the African environment, not just theories, about what should work elsewhere or what has worked elsewhere. So we believe that Africans should address African problems and make the best use of Africa's cultural context. Africa is the home of innovation, and we should be able to bring that innovation now systematically into the process of governance in many African countries. So we're going to have, for example, a research center for homegrown innovations in governance across Africa. We will have a center for African history and leadership. We will have a center for trade and regional integration. We will have a center for technology in governance. So our philosophy is that we are going to be world-class, but from an African standpoint. We want the African narrative that is genuine and original, because that's how everybody else has developed. They've developed on the basis of their own cultures and of their own contexts. And you see it in China, you see it in most of Asia, and you see it in the West. So Africa has to have its own worldview. And I made this argument in my book 10 years ago, Emerging Africa, how the global economy's last frontier can prosper and matter. We cannot prosper except we are determined on our own terms and looking at ourselves and holding ourselves accountable for our progress. We cannot rely on loans from outside, Africa, or aid from outside Africa. 50, 60 years of all that, and where are we today?
So Professor Moghalu, are you saying that Nigeria, for example, as a leading nation, but there are those who argue that economically we are fourth on the continent in terms of the GDP, but then are you, with the benefit of your knowledge, would you say that our reliance or the manner in which we listen to the Bretton Woods institution should be reduced, or we should just ignore them? What kind of attitude do you think we should give to these Bretton Woods institutions? Have they benefited us in any ways?
You cannot ignore global international institutions of economic governance that you are a member of. But if you have to recognize that you were absent at the creation of these institutions, which were created after the Second World War, and many African countries were not there, you have to then question, for what was this purpose, was this institution created with you in mind as a decision maker, or are you there as a joiner? So African countries need to have their own strategy in approaching international institutions such as the IMF and the World Bank Group and the World Trade Organization. So I'm not saying we should ignore these organizations. We should do what China did. China did not join the World Trade Organization for 15 years after it was established. They looked inward into their own country, preparing all their industries, educating their people, looking for the loopholes. And when they joined WTO, within a short time, they became the world's greatest trading nation. This is the kind of worldview and strategy that we want African countries, and that is what we'll be teaching at the ASG. So that we are not just, passengers on the bus of globalization. At the very least,
yeah. So if you look at a brief of economic history in Nigeria, in about the Second Republic or so, you had the emergence of individuals which education was not so much, but then they did so a lot. We had local business entrepreneurs in Nigeria, the Odutola brothers, the Odumegu Ojukwu, the Dantata in the north, and we had regional entrepreneurs who were doing very much well. But it came when we saw oil money, the rent concept of economy just took over. And the government, the Civil War did a lot of battering to our mentality, and things were decimated. Government took over. But again, privatization came. Thank God that those ideas brought the likes of a new businessmen and billionaires in Nigeria, the Dangotes, the Elumelus, the John Mummers who went into the private sector, in the media, for example, in the telecommunications. 2 years after MTN and Econet came, we saw Globacom. And the rest is history today. What kind of attitude should we be having if we want to own our own? And I quoted Paul Kagame earlier, that we need to start writing our stories as Africans or as Nigerians. What is the best way out of our quagmire?
Well, the best way out of our quagmire is to develop a mindset across millions of people, young people, and people who are currently senior executives in government. Let me ask you a question. You talked about the Dangotes, the Lumelus, and all the wealthy people. What is the percentage of Nigerians living in poverty today? That is what matters, and that's how a country is assessed. If you keep your eyes on the very few who out of their own industry have created great wealth for themselves, but it's the wealth of individuals, it's not the wealth of nations. What determines your ranking in the world is the wealth of nations. How productive is your economy? How many millions of your people have you taken out of poverty and into the middle class? And the reason Africa makes this mistake is because we worship at the altar of the GDP growth and as an assessment of how well we're doing. What we should be looking at, first of all, is how many millions of people have potable drinking water? How many millions of people have health insurance and access to healthcare? How many millions of people have education that is functional and skills-based? Those are the foundations you must lay before you move into the focus on economic growth. And beyond economic growth, you must then keep your eye on structural transformation, which is a move away from agriculture or natural resources like oil to productive economies that have economic complexity. So the problem Nigeria is having, and many African countries are having it, is that they are missing something. I keep talking about it. Nationhood is very important. Development begins in the mind. If a people are not united, if they don't have a common view, a shared ambition of who they are within the space they inhabit and what their future is and where they're going and how to get there, it becomes a problem because the politics becomes a contest, a food fight, an ethnic and sectarian food fight for who will control oil rents. That's what's the problem in many countries in Africa today. And so the matter of nationhood is job number one, but we leave it, we jump over it, and keep talking about economics, macroeconomics, and we just keep wallowing in the same problems. So, at ASG, we're going to be coming at the matter of governance and transformation and leadership from very strong and original structural foundations.
Thank you so much, Prof. ASG, African School of Governance, an initiative by Rwanda's President Paul Kagame and former Prime Minister of Ethiopia, Prime Minister Desalegn. Thank you so much. We are proud of you, Professor Kingsley Moghalu, who is the inaugural president of the Africa School of Governance, our ambassador there. You've done us proud before. You will do it again, but we wish you the very best. Congratulations. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching tonight.